Wanted to take this opportunity to introduce to you the book, The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, and just talk a little bit about it and why I think it's such an important book and why I've suggested that you read it now during your basically your free time to do as you wish, but hopefully to do some English things as well. Um, the book, The Things They Carried, is important for a number of reasons. Is it college prep? Absolutely. This is a book that's frequently read in colleges. One, as a piece of good literature. Two, as a good display of war. And three, as a display of good writing techniques. Tim O'Brien's style is looked at as a good writer, and there are so many good techniques used in here that are good to pick up as a writer. So in terms of college prep, yes, this is an important book. Maybe more important to me is the fact that this book is a great book in terms of showing people the reality of war. You have been exposed to the realities of slavery with some of the pieces we read from that. And so this is war not from a historical standpoint, but from a literary standpoint. And when people say, what is a great book that shows the realities of war? I think this book is at the top of the list. Um, this is frequently cited by a number of people as being this is what being in Vietnam was like. And Vietnam was a different type of war, completely different. The public's response to it was different. The experience of being there was different. And so it was hugely disorienting. And so a ton of literature came out of the Vietnam War. A lot of soldiers did writing. You could take an entire class on Vietnam War literature. And I've read a ton of it. But out of all of it, Tim O'Brien and this book, The Things They Carried, are at the top of the list um, based on everything that I see. To back that up, I taught a couple of stories from this while I was teaching out in Nebraska, and that was in 2003. And during that time, the Iraq War was getting going. And honestly, the Iraq War and the Vietnam War have been compared in a lot of ways. Well, anyway, I taught it to some of my seniors, and one of them ended up going into the military, ended up serving, ended up going over to Iraq and being in a combat zone there. Um, and a couple years later, I randomly got a phone call. I was living in Iowa at the time, and he found my number and called me and wanted to talk about being in the war, and he wanted to tell me that he had quotes from the book going on in his head while he was there. He said that book is right, it is accurate. He could feel parts of the book that he had read beforehand while he was there. He was shot in action. Obviously, wasn't killed because he came back. But that to me is as good of a stamp of approval as any to take a kid who was pretty much a non reader in high school, have this book be interesting enough for him to read it, and then also for him to go to war and come back and say, yep, he got it right. That's a big deal to me. And if that's what it takes, I think that people who have zero knowledge of what war is, which is most Americans, need to at least get some of this to understand the reality experience before we want to go about having opinions about what wars we shouldn't be involved in and things like that. So the book is worth reading just in that regard. I would also recommend this book because it is one of the most popular books I teach. Um, I will often teach pieces of the book, and then many students will voluntarily choose to read the rest of it on their own um, for pleasure because the reading is something they enjoy. It's hard to say you enjoy reading about war. There's some very nasty parts of this book, but it is so well written that it's one of the most popular books that I teach. Let's talk about the style of the writing. This is a little bit different. This is called a fictional memoir. Those two words shouldn't fit together. Fiction means made up characters and events, but memoir means about a person's life, a reflection on an experience that they had. So, how can this be? Tim O'Brien will say, and has said in interviews, that this is 100% true and 100% fiction. He will say, someone will say, "Did you make this up?" He'll say, "Yes." They'll say, "Isn't this true?" He'll say, "Yes." And he makes you exist in this land of handling those two truths together. Ultimately, what this boils down to is, did he experience exactly in this order with these exact people these exact events? He says maybe not. But the truth of the experience, the reality of being a soldier and the feelings involved, um, that is 100% true. And so he will not ever tell anybody, okay, that story right there, here are the details I added or changed, or this is exactly how it happened, or this is who was there. He won't go through and do that. He will say, this is what it is. This is what the war is. This is what it was like. This is true. Is it made up? Yes. Is it true? Yes. And so it's a great complexity in this book. Um, and he would also say it doesn't matter. This is what it's like. So whether this is exactly how it happened or not, it just doesn't matter. He wants to share the experience with you. Um, if you have the book and you look in the table of contents, you'll notice that it's not so much chapters. What you have is maybe 15-ish individual short stories. Now, each of these short stories can stand alone on their own. You could read them and they would make sense without the rest of the book. But they also all fit together and work together to create this complex whole. And so, is it valuable to read if you can only read a couple of them? Yes, absolutely 100%. Is it valuable to read this book cover to cover? Yes, absolutely 100%. And so, however you want to read it, whatever you pick up from this is worth your time. The first story is titled the same as the overall book. It's titled The Things They Carried. It's one of the most anthologized short stories in American literature. You would see it in most anthologies. It gets taught often. It's extremely strong, but I'm not even sure I'd call it my favorite in here. Um, there are long pieces, there are short pieces, and then it's just a complex read that's not hard to read, uh, but it makes you feel the reality. And I think that's so important. And I think that after reading this, you may want to read more of O'Brien's stuff about war or read other Vietnam War literature, because the reality of it is there. And I think it's just so important for us to have that reality as we become better thinkers and contributors in society. So that is my great invitation to you to read this book. If you are watching this, if you are reading this book, you probably own it now. And then I would say read the whole thing. But I definitely start with the first one and work my way through. And then even if you only could read a couple, I would do that. Please email me. Uh, Ask me questions. I would love to talk about this book. I would read with a pen in hand because there's so many quotes that I have students years later bring up to me as some of the most memorable in our literature experiences. So, if you have any questions about the book, please let me know. Happy reading. Enjoy it. Write about it. Talk about it. And let me know your thoughts. But I hope you do get a chance to experience some of O'Brien's piece of literature.